Titan hit the screen door with his full weight before Sarah finished screaming. The German Shepherd went through it like it wasn't there, landed on the porch, and put himself between Sarah and Colton Vance, with his teeth showing and his body shaking from the blow he had just taken across the shoulder. Colton raised the bat again. Sarah threw herself over the dog. The wood came down across her back instead. Inside her pocket, her phone was already calling the only number that mattered. 2 miles away, in a patrol unit on Millbrook's Route 9, Officer Jake Mercer heard his wife say his name and then heard a man laugh. Subscribe right now and drop your city in the comments. I need to see how far this story travels. Jake Mercer had been a police officer for 2 years and a canine handler for 14 months, and he had learned in both roles that the calls that hit you the hardest were never the ones you saw coming. They were the ordinary Thursday afternoons when the radio was quiet, and the route was familiar, and you were thinking about what was for dinner, and then your phone rang with your wife's contact photo on the screen, and something in the quality of the first second of silence told you before she said a word that the ordinary Thursday afternoon was over. He was turning onto Route 9 when his phone buzzed. Sarah calling. He answered with the easy reflex of a man who had called and been called by the same person every day for 3 years. "Hey, what's up?" What he heard instead of her voice was Titan, the German Shepherd's bark, distinctive and specific, the one Jake had learned to distinguish from the dozen other sounds the dog made, because that particular bark meant something was wrong, and was not a drill, and required a person to move immediately. Then Sarah's voice, not her normal voice, the other voice, the one she used when she was trying to sound in control of something that was not in control. Jake. One word. His name. The way she said it told him everything about the next 60 seconds before she said another word. "What's going on? Talk to me." He heard a man's voice in the background, then Titan again, then Sarah. "Jake, they're at the house. Colton Vance. He's on the porch. He won't." The line changed quality. Not disconnected. Something happening at her end that shifted the sound. Then a sound Jake would not describe in detail to anyone, but that he would not forget for the rest of his life. Then his wife said, "Jake, help me." Then the line went dead. Jake had his lights on before he processed the decision to turn them on. His hands were running the familiar sequence of radio call, location, request for backup, and the professional part of his brain was executing those steps correctly and completely, while the rest of him was doing something else entirely, something that did not have a professional name, the specific experience of a person understanding in real time that the thing they most needed to protect was in danger, and they were 2 miles away. He made it in 4 minutes. He would spend time later calculating whether a different route would have shaved 90 seconds off that, and arriving at the answer that it would not have, and then spending more time later still accepting that answer. When he turned on the Creston Road, the property looked wrong in the way that familiar places look wrong when something has happened to them. The front door was open. The screen door was off its upper hinge, hanging at an angle. Titan was on the porch, standing, his tan and black coat catching the afternoon light. And Jake registered 2 things simultaneously. First, the dog was standing, and therefore functional. Second, Sarah was sitting on the porch step with her left arm held against her body and her right hand on Titan's back. And the specific expression on her face of someone who has been through something and is now watching to see what the person they love is going to do with that information. Jake was out of the unit before it fully stopped. He crossed the yard in seconds and crouched in front of Sarah and put both hands on her face and looked at her eyes first, which was the trained response and also the human one, checking for the specific things that training had taught him to check for and that love had given him an additional reason to care about. "I'm okay," she said. Her voice was the controlled version, still. "I'm okay, Jake." The baby's okay. I checked. He looked at her left wrist, swollen. Held at the angle people held a wrist when moving it, produced a specific kind of pain. Who? He said. Colton Vance. She met his eyes. He had 3 men with him. They left when Titan went through the door. I think they weren't expecting. She stopped. She looked at the dog. Titan was watching Jake with the amber eyes that were alert and tracking, despite the laceration visible on his left shoulder, where the fur was matted dark. They hit him first, Sarah said, before they came at me. He went through the screen to get to me, and one of them had a bat. Jake looked at Titan. The dog looked back with the steady, patient certainty of an animal that had done what it was going to do and was not interested in discussing it. Jake put his hand briefly on the back of the dog's neck and felt him lean into it for exactly 1 second. The specific lean of an animal receiving acknowledgement and returning to attention. How long ago? Jake said. Maybe 10 minutes before you got here? Jake stood. He was 25 years old, and he had been in this department long enough to know what calm looked like from the outside, when the inside was not calm. And he was performing that distinction with the conscious effort of a man who understood that what he did in the next 10 minutes was going to determine what the next 10 months looked like. He called it in. He documented the porch, the screen door, Sarah's wrist, Titan's shoulder. He photographed everything from every angle with the specific thoroughness of a person who had been taught that documentation was not the end of accountability, but the foundation of it. He requested a supervisor. He requested a medical unit. He did all of this in the correct sequence, with the correct language, and he did not say Colton Vance's name on the radio in the tone he was feeling it, which was the exercise of professional discipline that 2 years of training had built into him, and that cost something tonight that it had never cost before. Sarah watched him do it. She knew him well enough to read the difference between his professional face and his actual face, and she watched both of them from the porch step with her bad wrist held against her chest. They've been sending letters for 3 months, she said, when he came back to her. Every week. The price going up each time. I kept telling them no. I know, Jake said. He said his father doesn't accept no. She looked at Jake directly. He said you weren't coming home anytime soon, and there was nobody who could help me. A pause. He said his father owns the police. Jake was quiet for a moment. He looked at his hands, then at the patrol unit, then back at Sarah. He said his name 3 times, Sarah said. Loud, like it was a shield. She paused. Like he thought I would stop if I knew whose son he was. What arrived 7 minutes later was not the supervisor Jake had requested. What arrived was Sheriff Dale Pruitt, who had apparently been monitoring the channel and had vectored himself to Creston Road before any other unit had time to respond. Pruitt was 54, heavy through the chest and shoulders, with the kind of face that had learned to look reasonable in situations that required something other than reason. He got out of his unit and walked toward the porch, and looked at Sarah, and looked at Titan, and looked at Jake with the expression of a man who had already decided what this situation was before he arrived at it. Jake, he said, hell of a Thursday. She has a fractured wrist, Jake said. My dog has a laceration that's going to need stitches. Colton Vance was here with 3 other men. Pruitt nodded slowly. I heard the call. That's why I came direct. He looked at Sarah. Ma'am, I'm sorry this happened. Can you walk me through what you saw? Sarah told him. She was precise and sequential, and she did not editorialize. And she gave him the same account she had given Jake, with the same specific language she had used the first time. Pruitt listened with the expression of a man who was listening, and noting, and processing. When she finished, Pruitt said, Now, I have to tell you, We did receive a call from Colton Vance approximately 8 minutes ago. He indicated there was a property dispute that escalated when the dog became aggressive and the situation got out of hand. Jake looked at Pruitt. She has a fractured wrist. I understand that. She is 7 months pregnant. I understand that too, Jake. Pruitt's voice stayed level. And I want to make sure this is handled correctly, which means we run it through proper channels. My office will open a formal investigation and... Your office, Jake said. That's standard procedure for an incident of this nature. Jake looked at the porch. He looked at Sarah. He looked at Titan, standing with a laceration at his shoulder, and the amber eyes running their patient assessment of the man in the sheriff's uniform, with the same quality of attention the dog applied to everything. I'll be filing through my supervisor, Jake said. Something moved across Pruitt's face. Not quite an expression. More the adjustment of a face that had been performing a particular arrangement and had just received information that required a recalculation. That's your right, he said. Yes, Jake said. It is. Pruitt looked at him for a moment with the specific look of a man communicating something that was not being said. Something about what Jake was choosing and what choosing it meant for Jake's position in a department that operated inside a county that had operated inside a particular arrangement for 30 years. Then he nodded once and went back to his unit. Sarah watched the sheriff's vehicle back out of the driveway. She watched it until it turned onto Creston Road and the sound of it faded. Then she looked at Jake. He's not going to do anything, she said. No, Jake said. Was he already calling Colton before he got here or after? Jake looked at her. Before, he said. She nodded, not surprised. The specific nod of a woman who has been watching a situation develop for 3 months and has been counting the people who were genuinely part of it and the people who were performing a version of being separate from it. She had her count. Jake's count matched hers. He took her to the hospital. He took Titan to the emergency veterinary clinic. He sat in the waiting room while the veterinarian worked on Titan's shoulder with both hands on his knees and the specific stillness of a person containing something that was not ready to be used yet. The laceration required 12 stitches. The wrist was fractured in the way that required casting and 6 weeks of healing and hurt every morning when Sarah tried to reach for something without thinking. His phone rang at 2200. Sergeant Diane Hollis. He answered. I read the report, she said. No preamble. All of it. Yes, Jake said. I believe her, Hollis said. 3 words. He had not known how much he needed to hear them until they arrived. Then she said, We need to be careful about how we do this. A pause. Because what you're describing is not just a property dispute and not just one man with a bat. And the reason I say that is because this is not the first time I've seen a report that mentioned the Vance family and watched it disappear before it became official. Jake held the phone and looked at the veterinary clinic's waiting room, at the institutional tile and the fluorescent light, and the dog behind the door who had gone through a screen to get between his wife and a bat. How many times? Jake said. Hollis was quiet for a moment. Enough, she said, that I've been waiting for someone to file correctly and completely, and not through Pruitt. Another pause. You filed correctly. You filed completely. He heard something in her voice that he recognized from certain moments in his own life. The specific quality of a person who has been patient for a very long time and has just been given a reason to stop being only patient. Don't talk to Pruitt again about this. Don't talk to anyone in the department except me. And Jake. Document everything from here. Every conversation, every call, everything. I already am, he said. Good, she said. Because what started on your porch tonight did not start on your porch. And it's not going to end there, either. Jake filed the formal complaint against Colton Vance through the Georgia Bureau of Investigation's online portal at 11:47 that night, sitting at the kitchen table with Titan's cone-collared head resting on his knee, and Sarah asleep in the bedroom with her cast propped on 2 pillows. He filed it through state channels because Hollis had told him to, and because he understood, after 12 years of watching how Millbrook worked, that filing through county channels was the same as filing it directly into Warren Vance's hands, with a cover letter explaining what Jake knew. He filed it completely. Every photograph, every timestamp, the medical report from the hospital, the veterinary report from the clinic, the audio recording he had made of Pruitt's conversation on the porch, which was legal in Georgia under one-party consent, and which he had made because Hollis had told him to document everything, and he had taken that instruction seriously from the first word. He went to bed at 1:15. He did not sleep until 3:40. Hollis called him at 8 the next morning. He was already in his uniform. "The complaint was received and logged," she said. "GBI has assigned it a case number. That means it exists in a system Pruitt cannot access." A pause. "How's Sarah?" "Angry," Jake said, "which is better than scared." "Good," Hollis said. "Angry people file things. Scared people don't." Another pause. "Pruitt wants you in the station at 9. Don't go without me." He went with Hollis. Pruitt's office had the specific quality of spaces that had been arranged to communicate authority to people who were already inclined to feel it. The desk was large. The commendations on the wall were numerous. The chairs across from the desk were slightly lower than the chair behind it, which was either coincidence or calculation. And Jake had stopped believing it was coincidence around month 6 of working in this department. Pruitt had 2 other officers present. Jake noted that. Witnesses to whatever version of this conversation Pruitt needed to have on record. "I reviewed the report you filed," Pruitt said. His voice was the reasonable voice, the voice that had been performing reasonableness for 30 years in this county. "And I've spoken with the Vance family's legal representative this morning." Jake said nothing. The legal representative indicated that Colton Vance is prepared to characterize last evening's incident as a property dispute that escalated due to the dog's unprovoked aggression. That the injuries sustained by Mrs. Mercer occurred during her own attempt to restrain the animal. Pruitt looked at Jake. "Now, I understand this is personal, and I understand your instinct is to push this as hard as you can. But I want you to think carefully about what that costs." "My wife has a fractured wrist," Jake said. "My dog has 12 stitches." "I hear you. And if this goes to a full proceeding, those injuries will be examined in context, including the history of the property dispute and the question of whether your dog poses a danger to individuals on the property." He paused. "A canine that is flagged as dangerous can be removed from active duty pending review." The room was quiet. Jake looked at Pruitt. He looked at the 2 officers against the wall. He looked at Hollis beside him, who was watching Pruitt with the specific expression of a person who has been waiting a long time for someone to say something in a room with witnesses and has just heard it said. "Are you threatening my dog?" Jake said. "I'm describing the landscape," Pruitt said. "The same way I would for any officer in this situation," Hollis said. "I think we've heard enough." Her voice was completely level. She stood. Jake stood.
"Jake filed through GBI. That's his right, and it's proper procedure given the nature of the allegation. If the Vance family has a response to the complaint, they can provide it to the assigned GBI case agent."
She looked at Pruitt with 20 years of accumulated patience that had found its specific application.
"Is there anything else?"
Pruitt looked at both of them. "Just making sure everyone understands the full picture," he said. "We understand it," Hollis said. They walked out. In the parking lot, Jake stopped beside his unit. He was looking at the driver's side door. The long scratch ran from the mirror to the rear door handle, deep enough to catch the paint, the kind of scratch that a key makes when someone runs it the full length of a vehicle with deliberate intention. Hollis stopped beside him. She looked at the scratch. She looked at the parking lot. "The surveillance camera on this section," she said, "is currently in a maintenance window." "Scheduled this morning," Jake said. "Yes," she looked at him. "How do you know that?" "Because I checked the maintenance log when I came in," he said. "The window was filed at 7:52 a.m. I arrive at 8:45. The window covers 7 to 9:30. He paused. "Pruitt gets in at 7:30. Hollis was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Photograph the scratch. Log the maintenance window. Send both to the GBI file." She looked at him with the directness of 20 years of doing this job correctly, inside a system that had not always made that easy. "And Jake, I want you to call Thomas Reeve today." Jake looked at her. "The retired judge?" "He lives 3 properties down from you on Creston Road," she said. "He has been watching Warren Vance's East Side operation for 4 years. He has never once called my office about it, which I used to find frustrating, and now find instructive." She paused. "Call him today, before the end of your shift." Jake called Reeve at 3:15 from a park bench 2 blocks from the station, on his personal phone, with the recording function running, because Hollis had said, "Document everything." And the conversation with a retired federal judge about a real estate developer with connections to the county sheriff was exactly the kind of thing that documentation was for. Thomas Reeve answered on the second ring with the voice of a man who had been expecting the call. "Officer Mercer," he said, "I've been wondering when you'd reach out." "Sergeant Hollis suggested I call," Jake said. "Good woman," Reeve said. 20 years in that department and never once adjusted the report to match what someone needed it to say. That's rarer than it sounds in this county." A pause. "I heard about Sarah. I'm sorry. How is she?" "She's angry," Jake said. "Good. Angry people don't let things go." Another pause. "What do you know about the East Side development?" "I know there have been certified letters for 3 months asking us to sell. I know the price went up each time. I know my wife said no each time. And I know Colton Vance showed up yesterday with 3 men and a baseball bat when she said no a final time." Reeve was quiet for a moment. "Come to my house," he said, "tonight, after your shift. There's something you should see." Jake arrived at Reeve's house at 7:30, with Titan in the back of his personal vehicle, the dog wearing his recovery cone and looking both dignified and mildly offended about it. Reeve met him at the door. He was 72, lean, with the specific economy of movement of a man who had spent 30 years in courtrooms and had learned to use his body and voice with precision. He led Jake to his kitchen table. On it was a folder 4 inches thick and a small digital recorder. "Sit down," Reeve said. "This is going to take a while." What Jake learned in the next 90 minutes was the shape of something he had been inside without knowing its full dimensions. Reeve had been documenting Warren Vance's East Side acquisitions since the 3rd property sale, when he noticed a pattern that was too consistent to be coincidence. The letters came first. Then code inspections that found violations that had not existed in previous years. Then insurance complications from a carrier that Reeve had traced through 3 layers of corporate structure to a holding company with Warren Vance's name on the original incorporation documents. Then the offers resumed, lower, adjusted for the complications that had been manufactured to create the conditions for a lower offer. 7 properties, Reeve said. Over 4 years. Every one of them followed the same sequence. Every one of them ended with a sale at a price below the initial offer because the complications had made holding on feel impossible. He looked at Jake.
Yours is the 8th.
Jake looked at the folder. Why didn't you file this? I filed it with the county sheriff's office 18 months ago, Reeves said. The complaint was received, logged, and closed without investigation in 11 days. He paused. The investigating officer was assigned by Pruitt personally. Jake looked at the table. So I stopped filing with the county, Reeves said, and I started building something that didn't need the county. He reached across the table and pressed play on the digital recorder. The voice that came out of the recorder was Warren Vance's. Jake had heard it once at a community meeting 2 years ago and recognized it immediately. The specific register of a man accustomed to rooms that adjusted around him. The conversation had been recorded in Reeves' driveway 4 months ago, when Vance had come personally to make the case for Reeves' property, which was not on the east side, but which sat between two parcels that were. Vance had explained, with the conversational ease of a man who did not expect his explanation to be remembered unfavorably, exactly how the process worked. The inspections, the insurance complications, the sequence, the price adjustment. He had presented it as practical wisdom, the way things worked, the understanding that two reasonable men could reach about the nature of property markets in a developing area. He did not know that Thomas Reeve had been a federal prosecutor for 22 years before his time on the county bench, and had been recording conversations on his own property for the entire 4 years of the East Side operation. Jake listened to the full recording. When it ended, he sat with both hands flat on the table for a moment. "How long have you had this?" he said. 4 months, Reeves said. "I've been waiting for the right predicate act, something that would take the case out of county jurisdiction entirely and give it to someone who couldn't be redirected by a phone call to the right person." He looked at Jake directly. "What happened on your porch yesterday is a predicate act. Battery on a pregnant woman. Battery on a certified police K-9. Intimidation connected to a documented pattern of coercive property acquisition." He paused. "That's a federal racketeering case, Jake. Not a property dispute. Not a county matter. A federal case that has been building for 4 years and needed someone to file it correctly." Jake looked at the recording device. He looked at the folder. He looked at Thomas Reeve, who had spent 4 years collecting evidence and waiting for a Thursday afternoon in Millbrook, Georgia, to become the thing that moved the entire case into a jurisdiction that Warren Vance's money and connections could not reach. "You knew this was coming," Jake said. "I knew something like this was coming," Reeves said. "When a pattern runs this consistently for this long, it always escalates. The question was, when and who?" He looked at Jake with the steady eyes of a man who had spent 30 years watching systems work and fail, and work again, and had developed specific opinions about which variables determined which outcome. "You filed through GBI. That was correct. Now I need you to take what's in this folder and this recording to someone at the federal level." He paused. "I have a name. Someone who knows my work and who has no professional relationship with anyone in Millbrook's county system." Titan shifted in the corner of the kitchen, his cone bumping gently against the cabinet. He looked at Jake with the amber eyes that were tracking the conversation with the attentive patience of a working dog who had been told to rest and was resting while maintaining full situational awareness. Jake looked at the dog. He thought about the screen door and the 12 stitches and Sarah's wrist in its cast, and the scratch along his patrol unit's door, and the maintenance window that had been filed at 7:52 a.m., and Pruitt's office, with the low chairs and the reasonable voice, and the 30 years of an arrangement that had functioned, because everyone inside it had calculated that the cost of the arrangement was someone else's cost. It had been someone else's cost for 4 years. 7 properties. 7 families who had taken a lower offer because the complications had made holding on feel impossible. And now Sarah's wrist, and Titan's shoulder, and a scratch that was supposed to communicate something about what resistance cost, in a county where the arrangement had 30 years of inertia behind it. "Give me the name," Jake said. Reeve wrote it on a piece of paper and slid it across the table. Jake looked at it.
He looked at the folder and the recorder and the retired judge who had been doing this quietly and completely for 4 years and had never once asked for anything except the opportunity to hand it to the right person at the right time. "Why us?" Jake said. "Why our property? We're not on the east side." Reeve looked at him. "Your property sits at the northwest corner of the development corridor," he said. "Without your parcel, the commercial access road cannot be routed through the corridor without adding 400 meters of construction through protected wetland. Your grandmother's 3 acres are the geometric keystone of the entire project." He paused. "Warren Vance has needed your land from the beginning. Everything else could be built around. Yours could not." Jake sat with that. The 3 generations in the title deed. The dock Jake had rebuilt with his grandfather the summer before he deployed. The kitchen window, with a specific angle of afternoon light that his grandmother had always said made the whole house worth everything. The house that Colton Vance had come to take on a Thursday afternoon because his father had decided that everything had a price. "He was wrong about that," Jake said. "About everything having a price." Reeve looked at him with the eyes of a man who had spent 30 years in rooms where everything was being calculated. "Yes," he said. He was. Titan looked up from the corner with the amber eyes and the recovery cone, and the 12 stitches, and the specific certainty of a dog that had already made its own calculation on a porch in the afternoon light, and had found the correct answer on the first pass, and had never once reconsidered it. Jake drove home from Reeves' house with the folder on the passenger seat and the name on the piece of paper in his jacket pocket, and Titan in the back, making the small sounds of a dog who was healing, and uncomfortable about it, but was not going to let either condition be anyone else's problem. He drove the long way, which added 8 minutes, and took him past the east side, past the properties that Reeves' folder documented. 7 houses whose owners had taken a lower offer because the complications had been manufactured to make holding on feel impossible. He looked at them as he drove. Most of them were commercial now. One was already demolished, a flat rectangle of cleared earth with survey stakes in the corners. Another had been converted to a staging area for construction equipment, the original house still standing at the back of the lot, like something that had been kept for later use and then forgotten. He thought about the families. 7 of them. He did not know their names from Reeves' folder yet, but he would know them, because Reeves' documentation was thorough in the specific way of a federal prosecutor's documentation, which meant it named every person and every date and every dollar amount and every code inspector and every insurance complications and the name of the carrier and the 3 layers of corporate structure that traced back to Warren Vance's holding company. He thought about what Reeve had said about the property dispute pattern. Letters first, then complications, then a lower offer. 7 families over 4 years, and not one of them had known they were part of a pattern, because each family only saw their own version of it. The pattern was only visible from outside, from the elevation of 4 years of watching and documenting and waiting for the right predicate act. The right predicate act was Sarah's wrist and Titan's 12 stitches. Jake parked in the driveway and sat for a moment with his hands on the wheel. He had 2 things now that he had not had 24 hours ago. He had Reeves' folder and Reeves' recording, which were the 4-year foundation of a federal case. And he had a name on a piece of paper, a federal prosecutor in Atlanta who knew Reeves' work and had no professional relationship with anyone in Millbrook's county system. What he did not have was a path from where he was to where those two things needed to go that did not pass through terrain that Warren Vance's money and Sheriff Pruitt's authority could reach first. He went inside. Sarah was at the kitchen table with her cast on the table in front of her, and a cup of tea she had apparently made and not drunk. She looked at the folder when he set it down. "What is that?" she said. He told her. All of it. Reeves' documentation, the 7 properties, the sequence, the recording of Warren Vance explaining the process to a man he did not know had a recorder running. The fact that their property was the geometric keystone of the entire corridor, and that everything Warren Vance had been building for 4 years was sitting incomplete because his grandmother had left a piece of land to a man who was not going to sell it. Sarah listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Your grandmother knew," she said. Jake looked at her. "She left it to you specifically," Sarah said. "Not the family. You. She knew what she was leaving, and she knew who she was leaving it to." She looked at the folder. She knew it was going to need defending. Jake had not thought about it in those terms. He thought about it now and found it fit something he already knew about his grandmother, who had been a woman of specific and durable opinions about what things were worth and what it cost to keep them worth that much. "I'm going to Atlanta tomorrow," he said. Sarah looked at him. "On your day off?" "Yes." "With the folder?" "Yes." She looked at the cast on her wrist. She looked at the folder. She looked at Jake with the eyes that had been watching him for 3 years and had learned to read the difference between the versions of him, the version that was performing calm and the version that actually had it. "Good," she said. Jake called the number Reeve had given him at 9 o'clock that night. Federal Prosecutor Ellen Marsh, Atlanta Field Office. She answered on the 4th ring, and her voice had the quality of a person who answered late calls as a professional baseline, which was either because she was that kind of prosecutor or because Reeve had already called her. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "Thomas told me you'd be calling." "He told you what we have." "He told me the outline. I need to see the documentation myself before I can tell you what it supports." A pause. "Can you come to Atlanta tomorrow?" "Yes." "Bring everything, original files, not copies, and bring the recording." Another pause. "Do you know if the county investigation is currently active?" "Pruitt told me his office was handling it," Jake said. "Which means it's either being made to disappear or being built into a defense for Colton Vance." Marsh was quiet for a moment. "The battery charge is the predicate act that opens the federal conspiracy and racketeering inquiry. The moment a federal inquiry is formally opened, Pruitt's office loses jurisdiction over the related battery complaint. That's the structure I need to explain to you when you're here." Another pause. "Mr. Mercer, I want you to understand something before you come tomorrow. What Thomas Reeve built over 4 years is exceptionally complete. But the moment a federal inquiry opens in a county where the sheriff has a 30-year relationship with the primary subject, that sheriff is going to know about it within hours. And he's going to call Warren Vance." "I know," Jake said. "And Warren Vance is going to call his lawyers, and his lawyers are going to move to seal or contest whatever documentation enters the federal record." "I know," Jake said again. "Which means the next 48 hours, from the moment you walk into my office, are going to determine whether this case survives or gets buried under a motion practice that takes 2 years and ends with a settlement that costs the Vance family very little." She paused. "Are you prepared for that?" Jake thought about the scratch on his patrol unit's door. He thought about the maintenance window, filed at 7:52 a.m. He thought about Pruitt's office, with the low chairs and the reasonable voice, and the two officers against the wall, who were there to witness whatever version of the conversation Pruitt needed on record. "I've been prepared for that," he said, "since I was 23 years old, and a canine coordinator told me that the most important thing a handler could learn was to trust the dog and hold the position even when everything around you was moving." Marsh was quiet for a second. Then she said, "Be here at 10. The thing Jake had not anticipated arrived the next morning before he left for Atlanta. Hollis called him at 7:30. Her voice had a different quality than it had on any previous call. Not alarmed exactly. The specific quality of a person who has received information that has changed the shape of something they thought they understood. "Pruitt filed an internal review request on Titan last night," she said. Jake went completely still. "He filed it through the department's canine compliance protocol," she continued, "citing the incident on your property as evidence of unprovoked aggression towards civilians. The review, if it proceeds normally, requires Titan to be placed in assessment hold pending evaluation by an independent canine compliance officer." A pause. "Pruitt has the authority to initiate the hold within the department. The compliance officer who would be assigned for assessment is a contractor who has worked exclusively with the county's canine program for the past 6 years." Jake understood the shape of what he was hearing. "If Titan is in assessment hold, he's not on duty with me." "Correct. And if I'm not running a canine partner, my patrol assignments change. Your night perimeter work specifically would be reassigned. You'd be moved to desk assignment pending partner resolution." Hollis paused. "Which means you are not in a patrol unit on Creston Road at night." "Which means Sarah is at that house without either a police officer husband on nearby patrol or a certified canine." Jake sat with the complete shape of what Pruitt had done. The maintenance window for the parking lot camera filed at 7:52 a.m. The internal review request filed the following evening. Each one individually was an action with procedural justification. Together, they were a sequence. And the sequence communicated something about what Pruitt was willing to do, which was not limited to the reasonable voice in the low chair office. "When does the hold take effect?" Jake said. "You have until 5 p.m. to contest it through department process," Hollis said. "After 5, the hold is automatically active pending review." Jake looked at his watch. 7:34 a.m. He had until 5 p.m. He was supposed to be in Atlanta at 10 a.m. with Reeves' folder. "How do I contest it?" he said. "Formal written response documenting that the dog's actions were consistent with certified protection training in defense of a protected civilian," Hollis said. "You need a veterinary report, your own incident documentation, and a witness statement if available." She paused. "Jake. Reeve." He understood. Reeve had been 3 properties down. Reeve had been watching the East Side operation for 4 years. Reeve had been watching the Mercer property specifically because it was the keystone, which meant there was a specific probability that a 72-year-old retired federal prosecutor who documented everything had been on his front porch on the Thursday afternoon when 4 men arrived at the house 3 properties down. Jake called Reeve at 7:36. Reeve answered immediately. "I was expecting you'd call this morning." "Did you see anything on Thursday afternoon?" Jake said. "I saw everything on Thursday afternoon," Reeve said. "I've been watching that property for 4 months, because I knew when the sequence reached its final stage, it would escalate, and I wanted documentation of the escalation." A pause. "I have video. My front porch camera has a clear angle to your driveway and partial porch visibility. Titan's actions are entirely captured." Another pause. And Jake. His response was textbook protection behavior. Any certified canine evaluator who is not on the Vance payroll will confirm that within 15 minutes of watching the footage.
Jake let out a breath that had been sitting in his chest since 7:30. "I need a signed witness statement," he said, "by 4:30. "I'll have it to Hollis by noon," Reeves said. "And Jake, go to Atlanta. The witness statement and the video documentation are enough to contest the hold. Hollis can file the response. You need to be in that office at 10.
Jake drove to Atlanta with Reeves' folder on the passenger seat and Titan riding in the back, with the cone and the dignity and the amber eyes that watched the highway the way he watched everything, with the complete and patient attention of a dog whose job never fully ended, even when the job required sitting in a moving vehicle for 2 hours. Ellen Marsh was 51, compact and precise, with the specific economy of motion that courtrooms produced in people who had spent 20 years deciding which movements were worth making. She met Jake in the lobby and shook his hand and looked at the folder and then looked at him. "Thomas speaks highly of you," she said. "He doesn't know me well," Jake said. "He knows you filed correctly and completely through the right channels and held your position when the county sheriff told you the landscape had costs." She turned toward the elevator. "That's enough." They spent 3 hours in a conference room. Marsh read everything in the folder with the reading speed of someone who had been processing dense legal documentation for 2 decades, and who paused only when something required verification or annotation. She listened to the recording twice. She asked Jake 18 questions, and his answers were all the same quality: specific and factual and complete, and not shaped toward any preferred outcome. She made notes in a document that grew longer as they worked. At 1:15, she set down her pen. "This is a federal racketeering case," she said. "RICO. The pattern is complete. The predicate acts span 4 years. The documentation connects every element of the conspiracy, from the original property identification, through the manufactured complications, through the coercive acquisition." She looked at Jake. "The battery on your wife and your canine partner is the most recent predicate act, and it is also the one that has the clearest human rights dimension, which is what makes it the right entry point for the federal inquiry." She paused. "I'm going to open a formal inquiry today, before I leave this building." Jake looked at her. "What does that do to Pruitt's battery complaint?" "The moment the federal inquiry is formally opened, the battery complaint becomes part of federal jurisdiction, and Pruitt's office is legally required to transfer all materials related to the incident to the federal case record." She paused. "If he has been building a defense for Colton Vance inside his office, that defense becomes federal evidence." Jake processed that. "He's going to know immediately." "Yes," Marsh said, "which is why I'm opening it today. Every hour it's not open is an hour Pruitt can continue working that complaint." She looked at him steadily. "And Jake, I need to tell you something about what the next 48 hours are going to look like inside your department." "Tell me," he said. "When the federal inquiry opens, Pruitt is going to understand that his relationship with Warren Vance is now under federal scrutiny. Not because he's been named as a subject yet, but because the pattern documentation makes his office's handling of 7 complaints over 4 years a relevant data point." She paused. "He's going to make decisions about his position based on that understanding. Some of those decisions may involve your employment status, your canine partner's status, your wife's safety, and the property itself." "He's already started," Jake said. He told her about the internal review request on Titan, about the maintenance window, about the scratch on his patrol unit. Marsh looked at him for a long moment. "You've been documenting all of it." "Everything," Jake said, "since Hollis told me to on Thursday night." Something moved across Marsh's face. Not surprise, the specific expression of a prosecutor who has been handed better material than she walked into the meeting expecting and is recalibrating upward
The documentation of the retaliation sequence is itself evidence of the conspiracy's operational presence inside the county law enforcement structure, she said. Every action Pruitt takes against you from Thursday evening forward, documented and timestamped, adds a count. Jake's phone buzzed. Hollis. He looked at Marsh. I need to take this. Take it, she said. Hollis's voice was even and contained. Reeves' witness statement arrived at 11:45. I filed the contest response at 12:30. The canine assessment hold has been suspended pending the outcome of the contest. A pause. And Jake, something else. He heard her breath. Pruitt submitted a formal request to the department's oversight board this morning to have your GBI complaint reviewed for procedural compliance.
He's claiming you filed without following internal notification protocol.
Jake said, Did I fail to follow internal notification protocol? No, Hollis said flatly. Internal notification protocol requires notification to a supervisor. You notified me. I am your supervisor. The protocol is completely satisfied. She paused. He knows that. He filed it anyway. Because he wants a formal proceeding on record where my name is the subject, Jake said. Yes, Hollis said. But Jake, every formal proceeding he initiates becomes documented evidence of the retaliation sequence. She paused, and he heard in her voice something that had not been there in 20 years of working inside a system that had required her to be patient in the specific way that cost something every day. He's building our case for us. Jake looked at Marsh across the conference table. How quickly can you open the inquiry? He said. I'm opening it now, Marsh said. She was already typing. Jake held the phone.
Hollis, he said, the federal inquiry is opening today, within the hour.
A silence that lasted 3 seconds and meant something he could not fully describe. Good, Hollis said. Her voice had the quality of a 20-year weight being set down on a surface that could hold it. Jake ended the call and sat across from Ellen Marsh, while she typed, and the federal inquiry into Warren Vance's East Side operation, and the battery of a pregnant woman, and a certified police canine came into existence in the official record of a federal system that Dale Pruitt and Warren Vance and 30 years of arrangement in Millbrook, Georgia, could not reach.
Titan was in the parking garage 2 floors below, healed 12 stitches in amber eyes and the patient certainty of a dog whose assessment of the situation on Thursday afternoon had been correct, and had cost him the laceration and the cone and the 2 hours in this particular vehicle, and who had not once in 3 years been wrong about what mattered or what the right response to it was. He had held the position. His handler had followed the dog, and now the federal system was catching up to what both of them already knew. Marsh called Jake at 6:47 that evening. He was at the kitchen table with Sarah and Titan, eating the first real meal any of them had managed since Thursday, and he answered on the second ring. The inquiry is formally open, she said. Case number filed. Assigned to my office. The GBI battery complaint has been formally transferred to the federal record, and Pruitt's office has been notified of the transfer by registered electronic correspondence. Timestamped 6:31 p.m. She paused. He knows. How long before he calls Warren Vance? Jake said. If he hasn't already, he has about 45 minutes before Vance's legal team closes for the evening, and he loses the ability to do it through normal channels. Another pause. Jake, I want you to know that what happens in the next 72 hours inside your department is going to be the hardest part of this. Not the case. The case is solid. What's going to be hard is the part where you're still working inside a building where a man who is now a de facto subject of a federal inquiry is still your department's chief officer. I understand that, Jake said.
Hollis is going to be your line, Marsh said. Everything goes through her. Nothing goes through Pruitt.
Nothing goes through anyone you're not certain of. She paused.
And Jake, I need you to tell Sarah what I told you about the next 72 hours. She needs to know this is going to get worse before the machinery of a federal case makes it better. He told Sarah after the call ended. He told her everything Marsh had said, the same way he told her everything, without managing it toward a shape that was easier to receive. Sarah listened with both hands around her mug, the cast on her left wrist making the grip asymmetrical. And when he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "How much worse?" she said. "Pressure," he said. "Probably on the property. Probably on my employment status. Possibly through official channels that look procedurally clean from the outside." He looked at her. "Possibly on you directly. Though the battery charge and the federal inquiry make a direct approach significantly riskier for them." "They already fractured my wrist," she said.
They already hit Titan with a bat.
She looked at the dog, who was lying with his cone and his amber eyes and his quiet patience. "The riskier calculation should have happened before Thursday." "Yes," Jake said. "It should have." She looked at him. "We're not selling." "No," he said. "We're not." "Good." She picked up her mug. "Then let's just get through the next 72 hours. What arrived the following morning was not what Jake had expected, which was a form of institutional pressure that looked procedurally correct from the outside. What arrived was something more direct, and therefore, in a specific way, more useful to the federal case. His captain called him at 8:15. Not Pruitt, Captain Ron Slade, who was technically Jake's direct commanding officer, and who Jake had found over 2 years to be a man who did his job correctly, as long as his job did not require him to choose between correct procedure and institutional loyalty.
The call had the quality of a conversation that had been scripted before it was made.
"Jake," Slade said, "I've been asked to inform you that your patrol assignment is being restructured, pending internal review of the Thursday incident." Jake opened the recording function on his phone. "What kind of restructuring?" "You're being moved to administrative support for the immediate term. Desk assignment, daytime hours, no patrol unit." A pause. "This is a procedural measure, not a disciplinary one." "What triggers the review?" "The canine incident report filed by Sheriff Pruitt in connection with your dog's behavior." "The canine assessment hole that was contested and suspended yesterday," Jake said. Slade was quiet for a moment. "The suspension of the hold is itself under review by the Department Compliance Board." Jake was taking notes on the legal pad beside his coffee.
Captain Slade, can you confirm that this conversation is occurring at approximately 8:17 a.m. and that the restructuring of my assignment is being communicated verbally rather than through written notice? Another pause. Longer. "I can confirm the time. Jake, this is just procedure." "I understand," Jake said. "I want to make sure everything is documented correctly. I am sending you a written request for the restructuring notice in written form, with the specific procedural basis cited. That's standard protocol for an assignment change of this nature." Slade said, "I'll have it sent to you today." "Before noon would be helpful," Jake said. "Thank you, Captain." He ended the call and called Hollis before the screen was dark. "Administrative support, desk, daytime," he said when she picked up. "Verbally communicated at 8:17. I've requested written notice with procedural basis." "Good," Hollis said. "I'm going to send you something in the next hour." Don't open it on a department device. The something arrived at 9:40 on his personal email. It was a PDF, 6 pages, and its header read, "Millbrook Police Department Internal Review Board, Formal Complaint Record," and the name in the complaint field was not Jake's. It was Dale Pruitt's. Jake read it twice. It was a formal complaint filed 3 years ago by a patrol officer named Kevin Greer, alleging that Pruitt had directly interfered with a criminal investigation involving a property developer in the east side of Millbrook, directing the lead investigator to close the case without interview and to reclassify the complaint as a civil rather than criminal matter. The complaint had been filed through the Internal Review Board. The Internal Review Board had found insufficient evidence to proceed. The finding was signed by the three-member panel. Two of the three panel members were, according to the document's signature block, current recipients of campaign contributions from Warren Vance's Political Action Committee. Jake held the phone. "Hollis, where did you get this?" "Kevin Greer resigned from the department 8 months after filing the complaint," she said. "He went to work for a transport company in Savannah. He called me last night at 10:30. Apparently, when the federal inquiry opened, some people started feeling differently about what they had been sitting on." She paused. "He wants to talk to Marsh." Jake sat with that. Kevin Greer, a name he did not know. A complaint filed 3 years ago. A panel finding signed by people on Vance's PAC list. A man who had watched his complaint disappear and had resigned and gone to Savannah and had waited 3 years for the moment when talking felt possible. The moment was now because the federal inquiry had made silence more expensive than speech. "Forward his contact to Marsh," Jake said. "Today." "Already sent," Hollis said. The twist arrived at 2:15 p.m. Jake was at the desk assignment Slade had placed him in, working through the administrative backlog that desk assignments produced, when his personal phone buzzed with a number he did not recognize. He stepped into the hallway to answer. The voice was Warren Vance's. Jake recognized it from Reeves' recording. The specific register of a man accustomed to rooms that adjusted around him, now carrying something different underneath it. Not quite uncertainty. The earliest precursor to it. The thing that happened when a person who had always operated in favorable conditions first registered that the conditions had changed. "Officer Mercer," he said, "I think it's past time we spoke directly." Jake pressed record. "Mr. Vance? I want to say first that what happened on your property Thursday was not something I sanctioned or directed," Vance said. "My son made a decision I was not part of, and the consequences of that decision are his to manage." A pause. "But I also think we're both mature enough to understand that a federal inquiry benefits no one, including your career, and that there are ways to resolve property disputes that are better for everyone involved." Jake looked at the wall of the hallway. He was 25 years old, and he was standing in a department building where his patrol assignment had been removed, and his dog had been subjected to a fraudulent compliance review, and the scratch on his patrol unit had been put there by someone who knew where the camera blind spot was. And Warren Vance was calling him to offer a resolution. "What kind of resolution?" Jake said. "A fair price for the property," Vance said. "Substantially above market. A settlement arrangement that resolves the Thursday incident without prosecution, and my personal assurance that the complications that sometimes arise in these situations will not arise for you or your wife." Another pause. "You have a child coming, a career you've invested in, a community you want to be part of for a long time. I'm offering you a way to have all of those things without the uncertainty of a federal process." Jake listened to the full offer without interrupting. He let Vance finish completely. Then he said, "Mr. Vance, are you aware that this call is being recorded?" A silence that lasted exactly the right number of seconds. "I want to make sure I'm understanding your offer correctly," Jake continued. "You're offering financial consideration for the property, a resolution of the criminal battery complaint against your son without prosecution, and a personal assurance against future complications, in exchange for my cooperation with a transaction that would close out
the federal inquiry. The silence on the other end had changed quality. I'm simply trying to find a practical path forward for everyone involved. The battery complaint against Colton Vance was transferred to the federal record at 6:31 p.m. yesterday, Jake said. It is no longer subject to local resolution. The federal inquiry into the East Side property acquisition pattern is formally open. Neither of those things can be resolved by a property transaction. He paused. What you've described in this call is an offer to obstruct a federal investigation in exchange for financial and legal consideration. I want to be clear that I've understood it correctly. The line was silent for 7 full seconds. I think there may have been a misunderstanding, Vance said. His voice had changed completely. The assurance was gone. What remained was the sound of a man recalculating in real time. I was simply trying to... I'm going to forward this recording to the federal prosecutor assigned to the inquiry, Jake said. If you have further communication about the property or the investigation, please direct it through counsel to Ellen Marsh's office in Atlanta. Have a good afternoon. He ended the call. He stood in the hallway for a moment, with his back against the wall and his phone in his hand, and the recording saved and time-stamped and complete. He thought about Thursday afternoon. He thought about his grandmother's property, and the 3 generations in the title deed, and the dock he had rebuilt with his grandfather the summer before deployment. He thought about Sarah on the porch step with her cast, and Titan with his 12 stitches, and the amber eyes that had made the right decision on the first pass and had not reconsidered it once. He called Marsh. She answered on the second ring and listened to the recording without speaking. When it finished, she was quiet for 4 seconds. He called you directly, she said. Yes. Without counsel present? Yes. And offered to resolve the federal inquiry through a property transaction and a negotiated settlement of the criminal battery complaint. That's what he offered, Jake said. Jake. Her voice had the quality of a prosecutor who has been handed the exact thing a case needed at the exact moment it needed it. That's an obstruction of justice call, on record, time-stamped, in his own voice. A pause. That just became a separate count. Jake leaned against the wall and looked at the ceiling of the hallway and felt the specific sensation of a situation that had been pressing against him from every direction simultaneously for 4 days, resolving into a shape that was still complicated and still in motion, but was no longer uncertain about its fundamental direction. Titan was in the back of Jake's personal vehicle in the department parking lot, heeled and coned and patient, waiting with the amber eyes and the working dog's understanding that being in the vehicle was part of the job on certain days, and that the job was not finished until the handler said it was finished. The job was not finished. But the ground had changed, and the man who had called Warren Vance's bluff in a department hallway with a phone and 2 years of training, and the knowledge that documentation was the only thing that outlasted the certainty of people who believed they were untouchable, had done the most important thing a person could do when the pressure was at its highest. He had held the position. He had trusted the record. He had not sold. Warren Vance retained new counsel by 8 o'clock the following morning. Jake knew this because Marsh called him at 8:14 to say that the new counsel had filed a formal representation notice with her office and had requested a 48-hour delay in all federal proceedings to allow for client review. Marsh had denied the request. The case was moving. The next 11 days were the hardest of Jake's professional life in ways that had nothing to do with physical danger, which he had been trained for, and everything to do with the sustained pressure of working inside a building where the shift had happened, and everyone in the building knew it had happened, and most of them were still calculating which side of it was safer.
His desk assignment continued. He reported at 8 o'clock and sat at a desk that was not his and processed administrative work that was not his primary function, and watched the building adjust around the reality that their chief officer was effectively a subject of a federal inquiry through his documented relationship with a man who had just been caught attempting to obstruct that inquiry on a recorded call. Pruitt did not acknowledge the federal inquiry publicly. He came to work every day and sat behind the desk with the commendations and spoke to people in the reasonable voice and signed paperwork and attended the Tuesday morning briefing and performed the full choreography of a man doing his job. What he did not do was speak to Jake directly. Not once in 11 days. The absence was its own communication. Hollis ran interference for those 11 days with the specific professionalism of a person who had been doing the right thing inside a system that made it costly for 20 years and had developed, through that practice, an exact understanding of which procedural moves were available and how to use them. She contested 2 additional administrative actions that Pruitt initiated against Jake through the Department Compliance Board. Both contests were upheld. She kept the documentation chain clean and complete, and she called Jake every evening at 7 with a status update that was always factual and never editorialized, and always ended with the same question. "How's Sarah?" "Angry," Jake said the first 4 times. Then, from day 5 onward, "Better." Sarah's wrist healed on the timeline the orthopedist had given. She returned to her classroom on day 9. Jake drove her the first morning, and she got out of the passenger seat with her cast and her bag and turned to look at him through the window and said, "I'm going to be fine." He said, "I know." She said, "Stop making that face." He made the face anyway, until she was through the school door. The twist that arrived on day 12 was not the one anyone had been tracking. Kevin Greer, the officer who had filed the complaint against Pruitt 3 years ago and resigned and gone to Savannah, had provided his testimony to Marsh's office on day 4. His account had corroborated the pattern in Reeves' documentation and had added something Reeves' documentation did not have: a direct witnessed account of Pruitt instructing the lead investigator to reclassify the criminal complaint as civil in Pruitt's office, with specific reference to his relationship with Warren Vance. Greer had remembered the conversation with the specific precision of a man who had replayed it regularly for 3 years, waiting for a moment when it would be useful to someone who could act on it. What Greer had not told Marsh in his initial testimony, and what he called Jake directly to say on day 12, was that he was not the only officer who had witnessed similar instructions from Pruitt. He had been careful to keep the names to himself for 3 years, out of concern for what providing them might cost those individuals. But the federal inquiry's opening had apparently produced the same effect on other people that it had produced on Greer: the recalculation that silence was now more expensive than speech. There were 3 other officers, all currently active in the Millbrook Department, all with specific witnessed accounts of Pruitt directing complaint management in connection with Vance-related incidents. Jake called Marsh. 4 witnesses, he said, all current or former active duty inside the department. Marsh was quiet for a moment that had a specific quality. "Jake, that's not just a racketeering case anymore. That's a civil rights case. When a law enforcement officer directs the suppression of criminal complaints on behalf of a private actor, the people whose complaints were suppressed have been denied equal protection under the law." She paused. 7 properties, 7 families, 7 criminal complaints that were reclassified or buried. Each one of those families has standing in a federal civil rights action. Jake thought about the 7 properties on the east side. The flat rectangle of cleared earth with survey stakes. The original house kept at the back of the lot like something remembered and not quite let go. "How do we get those families into the record?" he said.
Reeve has their names in his documentation, Marsh said. I need you to ask him to reach out personally. He's the right person for that call.
They'll trust a retired judge more than a federal prosecutor they've never met. She paused.
Jake, I need to tell you that when we add the civil rights component, this case becomes a different order of magnitude. The press is going to find it. And when the press finds it, the story is going to be the porch on Thursday. The pregnant woman and the dog and the police officer who documented everything and held his position. Jake looked at the wall. I don't want Sarah in the press. I understand that, but the story is already a matter of federal record. The battery complaint, the injury reports, the veterinary report, all of it is in the federal case file, and federal case files are subject to public records requests. She paused. I can't stop the story. I can make sure it's accurate. He talked to Sarah that evening. He told her what Marsh had said.
Sarah listened, and then was quiet for a moment, and then looked at him with the specific eyes of a woman who had been thinking about this since the day the first letter arrived.
If the story being accurate means the 7 families get something back, she said, then the story can be accurate. Jake looked at her. You sure? I'm 7 months pregnant and angry, she said. That combination does not produce uncertainty. Pruitt resigned on day 15. Not publicly at first. He sent a letter to the Department Oversight Board, citing health and personal reasons, which was the language that people used when the actual reasons were in federal documentation that they preferred not to be adjacent to. The letter was leaked to the Millbrook Courier before the Oversight Board had finished their preliminary acknowledgement of it, which meant someone on the Oversight Board had decided that controlling the narrative was more important than the process, which was itself a piece of information about the Oversight Board that Marsh filed in the case record. The official press conference was the following morning. Jake was not there. He was on Creston Road with Sarah and Titan, who had finished his course of recovery and had his cone removed the previous afternoon, and was now running the backyard with the focused energy of a working dog returning to full operational status after a period of enforced rest that had not suited him at all. Hollis called at 10:15. It's official, she said. He cited health. The Oversight Board accepted the resignation. A pause. The interim appointment goes to the senior officer by service length. A pause longer than the previous ones. That's me.
Jake sat on the back porch step and looked at Titan running the fence line and felt something settle in his chest that had been held at pressure for 15 days.
Hollis, he said. Don't, she said. Don't make it a moment. There's too much work to do. Hollis, he said again. She was quiet for 3 seconds. Thank you, she said, for filing correctly, for holding the position. Her voice had the specific quality of 20 years of waiting for the system to work the way it was supposed to work and watching it fail, and now watching it work and finding that the watching cost something she had not fully anticipated. Go back to patrol next week, you and Titan. Creston Road is your assignment. He went back to patrol on Monday. He and Titan. His unit, his partner, his route. The first shift back, he drove Creston Road as part of the sweep and slowed as he passed his own property, looking at the house the way you looked at something after almost losing it, with the specific attention of a person who had discovered the weight of something by being asked to give it up. The screen door had been replaced. The porch boards had been cleaned. The property looked like it always had, the property of a family that intended to remain in it. Titan watched the house from the back of the unit with the amber eyes. He was fully healed, scar at the shoulder visible only as a slightly different texture in the fur if you knew to look for it. Amber eyes running the same complete and patient assessment of everything they encountered that they had always run. The cone was gone. The limp was gone. The dog that had gone through a screen door to get between a pregnant woman and a bat
was the same dog that had been trained for 3 years and that had never, not once, been wrong about when to move. Colton Vance's battery trial was set for 7 months out. His guilty plea came 5 months in, 2 weeks before the trial date, when his defense team reviewed the complete evidence package and made the specific calculation that every defense team makes when the evidence is clean and complete and documented from the first minute by a 25-year-old police officer who had been told by his sergeant to document everything and had taken that instruction with absolute seriousness. He pled to aggravated battery. The sentence included a felony conviction and 18 months supervision, and the specific permanent consequence of a record that would follow the name Colton Vance into every room he entered for the rest of his life. Warren Vance's RICO indictment was filed 2 months after his son's plea by Ellen Marsh's office with the full weight of 4 years of Reeves' documentation and Kevin Greer's testimony and 3 additional officer accounts and the obstruction of justice call that Warren Vance had made to a 25-year-old cop who had understood exactly what the call was and had recorded every word of it. The 7 families on the East Side were named as plaintiffs in the federal civil rights action that ran parallel to the RICO case. Reeve had made the calls personally, sitting at his kitchen table, calling each family in the order their properties had been acquired, and every family had said yes because the call had come from a man they trusted and because 4 years of silence had been expensive in ways that speech, even difficult speech, could not match. The property that was the geometric keystone of the East Side Development Corridor was not part of any of those proceedings. It remained exactly what it had been when Jake's grandmother left it to him. A house on Creston Road in Millbrook, Georgia, in the family name, on land that 3 generations had worked and maintained and refused to measure in terms that reduced it to what someone else was willing to pay for it. On the afternoon that Warren Vance's indictment was filed, Thomas Reeve called Jake. He was brief, which was how he was about most things that mattered. "You held the position," Reeve said. "You built the foundation," Jake said. "I built a folder," Reeve said. "You turned it into a federal case by filing correctly and not flinching when the cost became visible." He paused. "Your grandmother would have approved." Jake did not have an answer for that. He sat with it for a moment instead, the way you sat with certain things, not trying to resolve them into language, but simply allowing them to be present. "How are the other families?" Jake said. "Processing," Reeve said. 4 years of having the wrong story is not erased by the right one arriving. But they have the right story now. That counts for more than I can calculate." A pause. "The cleared lot on Pemberton Street. The family that sold in the first year? They're considering building again." He paused. "They called me last week. Asked if I thought the neighborhood was stable." "What did you tell them?" Jake said. "I told them the neighborhood was stable," Reeve said, "and that the people protecting it knew how to hold a position." Jake ended the call and sat on the back porch with Titan beside him, and Sarah inside, putting the baby down for the first of what would be many unsuccessful afternoon nap attempts. And the October afternoon in Millbrook, Georgia, was the kind of afternoon that did not require anything from the people in it, except to be present in it. Titan pressed his shoulder against Jake's knee. The scar at his shoulder caught the afternoon light at a specific angle, visible and honest. The permanent record of a Thursday afternoon when a working dog had assessed a situation and made the right decision on the first pass, and had held the position regardless of the cost. Jake put his hand on the back of the dog's neck, and Titan leaned into it with a brief, specific pressure of an animal that had never once in 3 years of partnership been wrong about what mattered. And both of them looked at the yard and the fence and the house that was not for sale and was not going to be for sale, and had not been for sale on the afternoon that 4 men arrived on the porch with a bat and the absolute certainty that everything had a price.
Jake's grandmother had known that certainty was wrong. She had left him the property and the responsibility of defending it because she understood that some things were not worth the price offered for them, and that the people who needed to know that most were the people who had never been told no in a context that mattered. Warren Vance had learned it in a federal courtroom. Colton Vance had learned it in a plea agreement. Dale Pruitt had learned it in a resignation letter that cited health reasons, because the actual reasons were in documentation he preferred not to have adjacent to his name in public. And Jake Mercer, 25 years old, navy blue uniform and dark brown hair, and 2 years on the force, and 14 months with a German Shepherd who had never made a wrong assessment in his life, had learned something simpler and more durable than any of them. That the most powerful thing available to a person who was right was documentation. That the most important instruction a sergeant could give a new officer was document everything. That a screen door was not an obstacle to a dog who understood what needed to be protected, and that some houses were worth every letter and every scratch and every desk assignment and every late night at the kitchen table, because some houses were not about the wood and the windows and the title deed. They were about what the people inside them refused to become when the pressure was at its highest. The Mercer House on Creston Road in Millbrook, Georgia, did not sell. It did not compromise. It did not become a staging area for construction equipment, or a flat rectangle of cleared earth with survey stakes in the corners. It remained what it had always been, what Jake's grandmother had always known it was: a place where the right kind of people lived, the kind who documented everything and held the position and trusted the dog. The amber eyes looked at the fence line one more time, patient, certain, complete, still on duty, still exactly where they were supposed to be.